The Galactic Council chamber was a masterpiece of cosmic architecture designed to hold representatives from every known intelligent species in the universe. It floated in the vastness of space, a beacon of diplomacy and, depending on who you asked, bureaucratic agony. Today, however, the Grand Chamber was filled with an unusual tension. The newest member of the Council, High Minister Zortal of the Vexari Dominion, sat in his designated seat, a hovering, crystalline construct that adjusted to his preferred gravity field. Zortal was one of the more ambitious members, eager to prove his worth, but as he scanned the chamber, he couldn't ignore a glaring problem. The seat reserved for Earth, a simple yet oddly intimidating black chair, remained empty. It had been empty for years. Zortal, in his usual diplomatic tone, turned to senior council member Avarix of the Rilnari Republic, a species known for their infinite patience and mastery of interstellar law. "Elder Avarix," Zortal said with a polite flick of his tendrils, "I have been observing these sessions, and I cannot help but notice that Earth's seat remains unoccupied. Have they rescinded their membership?" The question sent an immediate chill through the chamber. Conversations hushed. A few council members turned slightly translucent, a defense mechanism against overwhelming stress. Others nervously adjusted their vocal translators, as if ensuring they heard correctly. Avarix sighed. He had hoped no one would bring it up. Ever. The elder turned to Zortal, and with a slow and deliberate voice said, "We sent them." Zortal blinked his 4 eyes. "Sent them? Sent them where?" Avarix exhaled. "Far. Very, very far." "Far where?" The chamber grew uncomfortably silent. Finally, another council member, a gelatinous entity known as Diplomat Rourke, spoke up, his voice a wet squelch through the translator. "We sent them to deal with the Aphelion Scourge." Zortal's tendrils retracted slightly. "You mean the Aphelion Scourge, the ultra-advanced warlords from deep intergalactic space, the ones that threaten to collapse the entire universe into an energy-dense singularity for aesthetic reasons?" Avarix nodded grimly. Zortal felt the overwhelming need to blink again. "And you sent Earth's diplomatic representatives to negotiate?" "No," Avarix said, rubbing the sides of his temples. "We sent a human." Zortal recoiled. "A single human?" "Well," Avarix admitted, "technically, 6 humans." This did not make Zortal feel any better. What possible reason could justify sending 6 humans against a species so advanced that their technology makes ours look like children rubbing sticks together? Avarix let out another exhausted sigh. "We asked the humans if they could handle it. They said, and I quote, 'Yeah, we got this.'" Zortal struggled to process the absurdity of what he was hearing. "You're telling me the greatest existential threat to the known universe, a civilization that could disassemble entire galaxies for fun, was delegated to 6 humans?" Avarix nodded. "We even warned them how powerful the Aphelion Scourge was, that their weapons could erase entire dimensions, that their fleets had no weaknesses." "And what did the humans say?" "They asked us when we needed it done." The chamber was now so quiet, you could hear the background hum of the universal translation matrix trying to process all the unspoken emotions in the room. Zortal was struggling to keep his usual composure. "This is madness. Humans are not the most advanced species in the galaxy. Their technology isn't even top tier. What could they possibly do that we couldn't?" Avarix slowly turned his head towards Zortal, his expression unreadable. "They talked." "Talked?" "Yes," Avarix said. "The humans set up a meeting. They spoke to the Aphelion Scourge and asked them nicely to stop." Zortal let out a sound that in his language translated roughly to, "You have got to be joking." "And?" "The Aphelion Scourge," Avarix continued, rubbing the bridge of his nose, "laughed at them." "Of course they did," Zortal scoffed. "A species of living gods being politely asked to stop destroying the universe? Preposterous. So what happened next?" Avarix looked Zortal in the eye. "They warned them." The chamber held its collective breath. Zortal's tendrils twitched. "Warned them?" "Yes." "And then?" Avarix leaned back in his seat. "Then, 1 week later, there was no more Aphelion Scourge." Zortal's brain short-circuited. The entire species. Gone. 1 week. How? Zortal croaked. The elder glanced at the empty Earth seat before answering. Nobody knows, he admitted, and the humans won't say. Zortal was losing his mind. An entire galaxy-dominating species was wiped out in a week, and no one knows how. Averix nodded gravely. The humans returned to the Council exactly 1 week after they left. When we asked what happened, they just said, "We warned them." Zortal's mouth opened, then closed, then opened again. His brain rejected the information like a corrupted data file. Averix continued. And when we pressed for details, they simply said, "It's handled." Zortal turned to the other council members, desperate for confirmation that this was some kind of elaborate interstellar prank. No one was laughing. The Aphelion Scourge had technology that broke the laws of physics, Zortal whispered in disbelief. They had weapons that could warp reality. How could 6 humans possibly defeat them? Averix gave a tired smile. Maybe they didn't fight them, Zortal, he said, voice barely above a whisper. Maybe they just explained what would happen if they didn't stop. A long silence followed. Finally, Zortal swallowed his horror and gestured toward Earth's empty seat. So, where are the humans now? Averix shrugged. They said they'd be back when there's something worth their time. Zortal sat there, deep in thought, as the rest of the council continued their meeting. But the only thing he could think about was the haunting, undeniable realization settling into his mind. Earth's seat wasn't empty because humans didn't care. It was empty because nothing in the universe had ever been dangerous enough to require their presence. Zortal sat motionless, his mind tangled in a web of confusion, disbelief, and, though he refused to admit it, terror. The Aphelion Scourge, a species so advanced that the universe itself seemed to bend to their will, had been removed from existence in a week, and all because 6 humans had a conversation with them. This was impossible. This was absurd. This was dangerous. Zortal leaned toward Averix, voice barely above a whisper. You do realize the implications of this, right? Averix didn't even glance his way. Oh, we're all very much aware. Zortal looked around the chamber, scanning the other council members, seeking even a flicker of doubt in their expressions. He found none. Instead, he saw fear. Not immediate, panicked fear, but the kind of deep-rooted fear that came from knowing that something unknowable existed just beyond comprehension. This is a problem, Zortal muttered, gripping the edges of his seat. Averix turned to him then, slowly, eyes carrying the weight of decades spent dealing with humanity's casual insanity. A problem, you say? Yes, a very serious galactic-scale problem. Averix let out a dry chuckle. Oh, Zortal, you have no idea. Zortal took a moment to collect himself before whispering, What if the humans decide we are the problem? At that, Averix's smile faded. Zortal continued, They removed the Aphelion Scourge, a species with technology far beyond ours, in 1 week. Not just defeated, erased, and we don't even know how. He took a deep breath. And yet, we sit here, smugly thinking that we are the governing body of the universe. Averix stayed silent. Zortal shook his head, his tone dropping even lower. What happens if we ever make them mad? Averix exhaled through his teeth. Then, my dear Zortal, we will cease to exist before we even realize what we did wrong. The chamber continued its usual droning bureaucracy, but Zortal no longer heard any of it. He was thinking, deeply thinking, about the implications of what he had just learned. For centuries, the Galactic Council had always been aware of humanity's potential for destruction, but this was something else. Humans weren't warlike in the traditional sense. No, war was something the rest of the galaxy understood, something that had rules. You invaded, you conquered, you occupied, you crushed resistance. These were understandable, predictable patterns. But humans didn't fight wars like other species. Humans didn't just win wars. They ended them. And now Zortal had proof. They had faced a species so advanced that it could wipe out the universe, and instead of fighting, they simply handled it. How? How? The mere absence of an answer made Zortal sick. Humans had been part of the Galactic Council for centuries. They had shared technology, engaged in diplomacy, and played nice with the intergalactic community. Or so everyone thought. What if they were just waiting? What if humanity had never been engaging in diplomacy at all? What if they had just been observing? A loud, sharp tone interrupted Zortal's spiraling thoughts. Avarix turned toward the center of the chamber, where a priority transmission had just been received. The air itself seemed to hold its breath as the holographic projection lit up. A humanoid figure appeared, tall, broad-shouldered, wearing a simple, unassuming uniform with no insignia. His face was obscured slightly by the static interference, but the voice was unmistakably human. Zortal felt his throat tighten. "Ladies and gentlemen of the Council," the human began, his tone casual, almost too casual, like someone who had just wrapped up a mundane business trip. "We're back." Silence. Then Avarix, in a voice carefully measured to hide the sheer horror he was feeling, responded, "Welcome back. We assume things went well?" The human smirked. "Oh yeah, handled it." No elaboration, no details, just handled it. Zortal's body tensed. "Tell me, human," he spoke before he could stop himself. "When you say, handled it, what exactly do you mean?" The human tilted his head slightly, as if considering how much to say. "Well, let's put it this way," the human said, his smirk never fading. "If anyone's planning a vacation to Aphelion space, might want to cancel." A slow, creeping horror spread through the room. "You destroyed them," Zortal whispered, voice barely audible. The human shrugged. "We warned them." The chamber was silent again. Then Zortal, unable to stop himself, asked, "How?" The human grinned. "Wouldn't you like to know?" Every council member collectively decided at that moment that they really, really wouldn't like to know. The human seemed to enjoy the unease in the room before he leaned in slightly. "So, we're back now, just letting you know. Anything important happen while we were gone?" Avarix, who had spent decades dealing with humans, shook his head. Not really." The human clapped his hands together. "Great. In that case, we'll be taking our seat again." The entire chamber flinched. Zortal swallowed. You're staying?" The human raised an eyebrow. "Why wouldn't we?" Zortal, barely keeping himself together, muttered, "Because the Council is terrified of you." The human grinned wider. "Good." Zortal's mind was racing. His mandibles clicked together nervously, a habit he'd long since abandoned until this very moment. The humans were back, and they were staying. He tried to keep his voice steady, though it was a losing battle. Surely you must understand the gravity of what you've done." The human didn't even blink. "Oh, we understand." Avarix, who had been through far too many encounters with humans to waste time on decorum, rubbed his temples. "Let me rephrase for my panicked colleague here. How did you do it?" The human's smile widened. "Trade secret. Trade secret. Trade secret." Zortal wanted to slam his head against the table. He inhaled sharply, trying to regain some semblance of control over the situation. "You're telling me that in 1 week, your, what was it? Team of 5? 6, actually. Don't forget me," the human interjected with a wink. Zortal's claws twitched. "Right, 6 humans, against an empire that had the capacity to rewrite reality itself. Yep. And they're just gone." The human gave a casual shrug, as if he were discussing the weather. "They had their chance. We warned them." Avarix exhaled through his nose. "I assume there was resistance." The human laughed, not a cruel laugh, not a victorious one, just amused. "Oh, they tried," he said. "They really, really tried." Zortal was not comforted. The chamber was silent, save for the occasional flicker of a datapad. No one dared speak, as if breaking the silence would somehow invite more horrifying revelations. But Zortal had to know. "If I may ask," he started, hesitating. The human gestured for him to continue. Zortal's throat clicked. How did you even find them? The Aphelian scourge had no homeworld, no central fleet, no headquarters. They were everywhere and nowhere. Even our best intelligence operatives couldn't track them. The human tilted his head, as if amused by the question. Oh, that was easy, he said. We just followed the sound of screaming. Zortal froze. Avarix groaned and buried his face in his hands. The human leaned forward, resting his elbows on the table. Look, I get it. You want details. You want to understand how we did it. But that's the thing. His voice lowered slightly, a hint of something unreadable beneath it. You won't. Zortal's eyes narrowed. What do you mean? The human exhaled through his nose. You think you want an answer. You think that knowing how we did it will make it better. That if you can categorize it, if you can fit it into some kind of logical framework, it'll stop being scary. The room felt colder. But here's the thing. The human's eyes sharpened. The minute you start understanding us, I mean really understanding us, that's when you'll never sleep again. Silence. Utter, deafening silence. For the first time since the humans had returned, Zortal genuinely wished they hadn't. Avarix finally snapped out of his own existential crisis long enough to attempt diplomacy. Very well, he said, choosing his words carefully. You've made your point. I suppose it would be unwise to press for details. Extremely, the human confirmed. Avarix rubbed his temples again. Well, that still leaves the matter of... He was cut off by the doors slamming open. A younger council member, wide-eyed and visibly shaking, stumbled inside. Senior counsel, there's been a... Avarix's expression darkened. What now? The younger alien swallowed hard. It's the Deathakar Dominion. They just... He hesitated. What? Zortal asked, voice tense. They just surrendered. Zortal blinked. To who? The young councillor's mouth opened, closed, then opened again. Earth. The entire chamber froze. Avarix turned very, very slowly toward the human, who was grinning like he'd already expected this. Would you like to explain? Avarix asked, voice dangerously close to pleading. The human stretched, entirely too relaxed for someone who had just triggered an empire's unconditional surrender. Oh, that? Yeah, we talked to them. Avarix's eye twitched. You talked to them. Yep. And then they surrendered. The human smirked. They're very cooperative now. Zortal stood up so fast his chair nearly toppled. You're turning empires over lunch breaks? The human grinned wider. Wouldn't you like to know? Zortal immediately regretted asking. Zortal had seen many things in his long tenure on the Galactic Council. Civil wars, economic collapses, even the time the Vrongsi accidentally declared war on themselves due to a clerical error. But never, never had he seen an entire empire unconditionally surrender to 6 humans. 6. Not an armada, not a coalition of deathworlders, not a galactic superweapon, just 6. He was having trouble breathing. Avarix, ever the pragmatic one, took a deep breath and turned to the human. Okay, he said, voice painfully steady. I'm going to ask this very carefully. The human nodded, as if humoring him. What exactly did you say to the Deathakar Dominion to make them surrender? The human smiled. Not a wide grin, not a smirk, just a simple, small smile. Oh, it wasn't just what we said. Avarix braced himself. Then what was it? The human leaned back in his chair, crossing his arms. Well, let's just say we gave them a very clear picture of what would happen if they didn't. Zortal swallowed. You showed them something? The human nodded. We had a meeting, sat them down, had a chat. Zortal's throat clicked. And then? The human's smile didn't change. They saw reason. Avarix rubbed his temples so hard it looked painful. That's it? That's all you're giving us? Pretty much, Zortal snapped. You cannot just walk in here, tell us that you somehow made an empire known for eradicating planets' surrender, and expect us to just accept it. The human shrugged. I mean, you can try to get more details, but I really wouldn't recommend it. Why? The human's smile remained, but his eyes didn't. Because then you'll have to sleep at night. Zortal's soul left his body. Avarix leaned back in his chair, staring at the ceiling like he was reconsidering his life choices. Zortal hated everything about this, but he had one last card to play. Fine, he said, voice tight with frustration. Then at least tell me what you were planning to do if they hadn't surrendered. The human blinked. Oh, that's easy. Zortal immediately regretted asking. We'd just do what we did to the Aphelian scourge. The entire council flinched at once. Zortal felt his lungs stop working. Avarix stared at him like he'd just uttered an ancient curse. You mean? Yep, the human said. They had a choice. Zortal finally found his voice. And if they hadn't made the right one? The human smiled. They wouldn't be around to regret it. No one spoke. No one moved. The chamber was so silent that Zortal swore he could hear his own nervous system shutting down. After what felt like an eternity, Avarix cleared his throat. I see. The human nodded. Glad we're on the same page. Avarix exhaled, very slowly. Well, he said, that certainly explains why Earth's seat has been unoccupied. The human chuckled. Yeah, we've been a little busy. Avarix forced a smile that was way too stiff to be natural. Yes, I imagine so. Zortal, meanwhile, was having a quiet existential crisis. The Aphelian scourge had been an unstoppable nightmare, an entire civilization of beings who had fed on the fabric of reality itself. They had burned planets to sustain themselves, warped dimensions like playthings. Even the Council's most advanced war fleets had been reduced to nothing but whispers in the void, and humans destroyed them in a week. A week. Now, another empire had surrendered without a single shot being fired, and all the humans had done was have a meeting. Avarix steepled his fingers. Just to be clear, Earth is satisfied with the current state of things. The human raised an eyebrow. Are you asking if we're planning on doing this again? Yes. The human leaned forward. Do you think we need to? Zortal instinctively recoiled. Avarix let out a very, very controlled breath. No, I don't believe so. Good, the human said, standing up and stretching. Because we'd rather not. This whole thing was supposed to be a vacation. Avarix and Zortal exchanged a look. Vacation. Vacation. The humans had annihilated an existential threat to the universe, forced an empire into submission, and permanently terrified the entire Galactic Council. On vacation. Zortal wanted to scream, but he valued his life too much. Zortal had seen a lot in his centuries on the Galactic Council, but nothing compared to this. The humans had done it again. 1 week, 1 meeting, one entire intergalactic threat erased like it never even existed. And now, they were back in the council chamber, acting like this was just another Monday. The chamber was packed. Every council member, every delegate, every species that had ever thought about being a part of the galactic order, they were all here. Even the Dethakar Dominion's representative had managed to drag himself in, looking exactly like someone who had just narrowly avoided extinction. All eyes were on the human at the center of the chamber. His name was Commander Eric Shaw, and he looked annoyed. So, before we get into this, he said, folding his arms, can we all agree that we'd rather not do this again? Silence. A single panicked-sounding yes came from the Dethakar representative. Eric smirked. Good. Saves me the speech. Avarix coughed. Commander Shaw, please. The council requires a full report on whatever it is you did. Eric sighed. You're not going to like it. Zortal very much already didn't like it. Regardless, Avarix said, it is protocol. Eric nodded, then pulled a small device from his belt and pressed a button. A holographic projection appeared over the chamber, displaying 6 humans sitting at a table. Across from them sat a Dethakar warlord, looking visibly uncomfortable. Zortal's stomach dropped. They really had just sat down for a meeting. The recording played. Eric's voice came through clear and casual. All right, his hologram said, kicking back in his chair. So let's talk about this whole destroying the universe thing. The Deathakar warlord hissed. Your kind will not. Eric raised a hand. Yeah, dramatic monologue, ultimate power, blah blah blah. We get it. The warlord froze. Eric leaned forward. Here's the deal, buddy. You don't stop. We stop you. And I promise you, you don't want that. The warlord snarled. You think you're fleet? What fleet? Eric interrupted. We don't need a fleet, just us. The warlord laughed. The rest of the Deathakar at the table did not, because they had just gotten the message. Eric tapped a small device on his wrist. Computer, show them. The projection shifted, revealing a detonated star system. Zortal felt his throat tighten. You see, Eric's hologram continued, we asked the Aphelian Scourge to stop, and they didn't, so we did this. The warrior caste of the Deathakar stopped laughing. Eric kept going. We're really good at wiping people out when we have to, he said. But we'd rather not. So let's cut to the chase. Do you stop, or do we turn you into a footnote in galactic history? The Deathakar council members visibly panicked. The warlord stared. And then, after a long, agonizing silence, he nodded. The recording cut out. The chamber was dead silent. Avarix looked like he needed therapy. Zortal wanted to be anywhere but here. The Deathakar representative stood up so fast he almost knocked over his chair. On behalf of the Dominion, we formally renounce all hostile activities and pledge full cooperation with the Galactic Council. Avarix blinked. Just like that. Just like that. Zortal had never seen a species surrender so quickly. Eric grinned. Glad we could clear that up. Avarix opened his mouth, closed it, then rubbed his temples. This is highly irregular. Eric chuckled. You're welcome. Zortal resisted the urge to scream. Avarix took a very deep breath. Then, slowly, he turned to the assembled council members. All in favor of never, under any circumstances, angering Earth. Every hand, limb, appendage, tentacle, and horrific reality-bending limb went up at once. Avarix nodded. Motion carried. Eric winked. Good call. Zortal had never felt so relieved. As Eric turned to leave, Avarix hesitated. Commander. Eric paused. Avarix frowned. How did you know the Deathakar would surrender? Eric's grin widened. We didn't. Zortal felt his soul leave his body. Avarix blinked. You didn't? Nah, Eric shrugged. We just figured, worst-case scenario, we'd handle it the other way. Zortal had a full-body existential crisis. Avarix sighed. You humans are terrifying. Eric smirked. Yep, and now you know why our seat's always empty. And with that, he walked out. Zortal put his head in his hands. He was never sleeping again.